annual gathering that started in person in 2014. It's been virtual since 2020 of folks who teach with primary sources to kind of get together, share ideas, share practices. Most of the sessions are focused on practical things that we can do and learn from each other, prioritizing conversation and sharing ideas. So there aren't some of the more formal conference presentations or keynotes, but we want this to be an open space to talk and practice things we don't get to elsewhere, perhaps. So the goal is experimentation and learning, sharing new ideas in a supportive environment. It's the product of an energetic community of folks who teach with primary sources, who come together under this self-identification of people who teach with primary sources, whatever that means to you, often in archives, libraries, education, museums, or other contexts. So the goal is to be non-hierarchical community of lurkers, learners, and leaders with lots of ways to contribute, to participate. There's plenty of options for ways to get involved, and we encourage volunteer participation at any level. So if you're new to this work or you're a grad student, there's an intro page on different ways to connect and learn and get involved. tpscollective.org/new-2tps. Feel free to hop in and out of this session and others. That's absolutely welcome. And these are just some reminders for our leaders and helpers and other things for folks to keep in mind. And we have some great volunteers on the Zoom now who, if you have questions, if you have comments, put them in the chat. And we're all here just to kind of talk and learn. So I'm going to switch to our other slides. All right, so this is the topic of our conversation for this session, integrating art and creative making into teaching with primary sources. I'll introduce myself and then I'll maybe let each of the people on the list here just quickly come on and say who you are, and then we'll jump into it. But I'm Virginia Ferris. I use she, her pronouns. I am at North Carolina State University. I work in the Special Collections Research Center there as the lead librarian for outreach and engagement. And I'll pass it to Jenny.
I don't often get to work with another Virginia, but I'm the Ginny, shortened version of Virginia, Moran at McAllister College. I'm the Special Collections Librarian there, and I wanted to thank Virginia for being our session wrangler and also handling our slide deck today. So thanks a lot. And I'll pass it to Katie Banks.
Hello, my name is Katharine Banks, but I go by Katie, and I use she, her pronouns. I am the University Archivist and Information Resources Librarian at Milligan University, which is a small liberal arts university in Northeast Tennessee. And I'll pass it on to Jackie.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Virginia, to echo Jenny. My name is Jackie Beckey. I currently serve as a Special Collections Librarian at Carleton College, a small liberal arts college in Northfield, Minnesota. Katharine.
Hi, everyone. So I'm the second Katharine, and I go by Katharine. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an assistant professor of French, and as Jackie just said, I also work with her at Carleton College.
Thanks, everyone. All right, so I will kick us off. I'm going to talk about some of the ways we are collaborating with other folks in the libraries and on campus to integrate art and teaching with primary sources. So I'm calling my slides Creative Partnerships, the real emphasis on partnerships and collaboration with folks in our community. For student success, thinking about that as supporting students in their journey as students and beyond, in the classroom and beyond. But some of what I'm going to share will be kind of beyond campus even. So, but to give a little bit of context, NC State University is a large research university, part of the UNC system. It's a land-grant university, so a lot of the research and teaching is focused on STEM disciplines, engineering, textiles, agriculture, things like that. So We are kind of in a unique position as a special collections that has a lot of interesting materials about the range of topics that are strengths for the university, but a lot of the people working in those disciplines may not necessarily think about archives and primary sources as useful to their work. So that's a lot of our job with outreach, demonstrating that relevance and value. So in thinking about some of the partners and collaborators that we have really been learning from and been inspired by, I'm going to shout out our libraries wide outreach and programming department, who organize all kinds of events for the public, for the campus community, for students specifically, and our well-being committee in the libraries that has focused on creating programming and services for supporting students' mental health and well-being on campus. So there is a series called Crafting Resilience that is in partnership with the libraries and campus prevention services, where once a month or more, there will be just drop-in craft and art making activities in one of the large public spaces in the library, where students can come in and just take a break and work on making something creatively. They can do it quietly, they can meet people, kind of find community. And another series within that is creative journaling, where students come and make notebooks and create kind of art in those. I'll go into a little more depth on that. And then we have other colleagues just in the libraries who are artists or who have other skills that they bring to work and that we can collaborate with. I work with an incredibly talented printmaker, Kara Smelter, who has brought some of her teaching and art making to her work, and we've collaborated in the classroom. So I have benefited from kind of learning from a lot of my colleagues who have led some of this work in creating books and notebooks, creative journaling, working with zines, making zines in the classroom or in some of these crafting resilience workshops, collage, lino cut, and all kinds of things. So that's just a little bit of background that's been really motivating and inspiring for my work and what made me want to reach out and see who else wants to talk about this. So to dip into the creative journaling event series specifically, one of my colleagues, or two of them specifically, in special collections in the preservation unit, Emily Schmidt and Robin Harper, I want to call them out. They are incredible partners, and they're also artists and book artists in their own free time. They really led this idea for creative journaling, taking old books from the circulating collection that are falling apart, where the covers, the bindings and the paper would just be scrapped or sent to the recycling, and cutting off those board covers and bringing them as supplies for making new notebooks with a hole punch coil bound notebook maker. The brand is called Cinch, C-I-N-C-H. It is extremely cool, extremely easy to use, but they realized we could just reuse these boards and give people a chance to take a piece of the library and make it into something new, as well as kind of general scrapbooking supplies, collage papers. And we've also begun to create collage papers from special collections, images and materials that we create kind of collage pages and print them out for students to cut up and remix into something. So these are some photographs from some of the creative journaling events. They're just a really positive, peaceful kind of environment in a very, open, bright space in the library. They usually happen about once a month, and they have just been increasing in popularity. So again, this is a libraries event. It's not special collections, and it's not a teaching event, but this has really become kind of a great example of building community. Students will come back month after month. They've found friends. They've kind of been just repeat visitors and bring their books back to work on them some more. They make new books. It's really wonderful to watch that. And so being a part of that as a volunteer, staff from around the libraries can volunteer to support the events. I just was like, we need to do something like with this in our teaching, in our outreach. So we started adapting that into some of our public programming for special collections. This photograph on the left is the cinch machine, which is just a hole punch. You push it down, it'll punch the coil binding holes into the side of cardboard or different kind of thickness of paper. It's a pretty easy tool to learn and to teach people how to use on the spot. And so we will create some book covers with images from our collections, which is a great way to kind of get people interested and show them some of the things that we have in spaces they might not normally be aware of us. So the event on the left was a public event, kind of family focused event called the State of Sciences, where one of our libraries opened up to partners from across the university and the area to have tables and kind of interactive exercises. So we had notebooks and coloring sheets with images from our collections. On the right, this is from an open house that we had in the spring featuring entomology collections, rare books and university archives, photographs, drawings of all kinds of bugs. And so there's so many great visual materials, and we wanted to make a series of book covers. People could come pick one out and make their own notebook to take with them. So it's very popular and it's really easy to manage. So when thinking about how we could do more work with these, as this one example of kind of making something in classes, we partnered with 2 faculty members in a class this spring, Architecture 590, Furniture Design and Fabrication. So the 2 faculty members, one is a librarian, but he's closely connected with the College of Design and Engineering. The other faculty member was appointed in the Department of Architecture, and the 2 of them were designing a course where they wanted to bring a small group of students together to create a design collective and figure out solutions to this space that you see in this photograph on the left. It's a little bit hard to see because it's all glass walls enclosure. It doesn't go all the way to the ceiling, but I don't know if my mouse shows up, but there's a little, it's probably maybe 12, 15 feet tall glass with 2 door entrances, kind of in the middle of the main library entrance space. This space has been called the Tech Showcase. It's been a place to kind of show off technology students can borrow from the libraries, but it's going under a transition of what else could we use this for, to invite more student engagement and work. So these architecture students were charged with thinking about how this space could be reimagined and redesigned, and furniture could be integrated into the space to support this new imagining of it. So they had their first session pictured here in the space itself to really understand the constraints and what they're working with, and think about the questions that would help them work with this kind of problem, and understand what the problem, how the semester would evolve. So this first session in the library, in the space, the next session would be with special collections. And then the rest of the semester would be a lot of prototyping and process to ultimately design and make some furniture for this space. So the following week, they came into special collections. My colleague Shima Hosseini Nasab, pictured up here on the middle top photograph, curated a selection of materials to bring in and show the students and give them time to just explore and play, take notes, take photographs, get some history of the College of Design on campus that they're a part of, materials from collections documenting its history, and then other kind of design books and artist books and architectural drawings and furniture design drafts and things like that, to give them a sense of context and to give them some inspiration, something to think about in the beginning of their semester process. And then the second portion of that visit, we moved to a different room where we could safely have glue sticks and scissors and things that you don't want around the materials themselves. But we brought our cinch notebook makers and collage supplies, including printed images from our collections that relate to design, spaces, students in the library, furniture, all kinds of just visual and contextual images, and told the students, these are your supplies and you have the choice to make something. You can make a notebook, you can make your own kind of on the spot artist book if you want to construct something different. You could just do an art piece, a collage, whatever it is. But the faculty members created these prompts to think about choosing one of these kind of bullet points, what they wanted to make in relationship to the space they were going to be designing for the semester. So really thinking about how could they analogize it to other kinds of spaces or objects, describing it to someone from a completely unfamiliar world, or someone who is hearing or sight impaired, just different ways of imagining it and conceptualizing it. So they had about an hour to construct and fabricate whatever they wanted to as a book or a piece of art, and then presented it to the class. And they used a document camera to talk for a few minutes about each of the things they made. Most of them made notebooks. Other folks made different things, just as a creative experiment. But one of the kind of motivations was you can make a notebook that can be your sketchbook for the semester and can kind of remind you of this inspiration from this first day. But what was really gratifying was a lot of the students gravitated toward the printed images from our digital collections of students and design from campus history. And they said this really kind of gave them a sense of rootedness in the ongoing legacy of the College of Design and the campus community. That, seeing one of the first women students in the College of Design building a geodesic dome, that was kind of an inspirational reminder in having that in like a sketchbook for the rest of the semester. So fast forwarding several months later to May, they spent a lot of time. I don't have all the photos and can't really speak as much to the design process, but they spent a lot of time designing what you see here, 3 pieces of furniture that are in the space. This is kind of a starting point for other classes that will do similar work in the tech showcase. But we were able to come see their final review and hear their presentations and how much that initial session with the original materials and the making of whatever it is they wanted to make that first day kind of set a good foundation for them as a group, as a collective, and for the process. So it was a really great chance to work with a community that we don't always get to in the School of Architecture and in a studio that's making something. So it was really cool to see something very tangible come out of that. So I will leave it there. I'm going to mute my video, but I will continue driving the slide. So other presenters just call out what you, next slide. So thank you.
That was a really tough act to follow, I think, here. But again, I'm Ginny Moran. I'll be talking about some prototyping that I did through workshops in order to teach a class called Introduction to Artist Books. I'm gonna, just so Virginia knows, I'm gonna spend a little time on this slide, so I'll let you know when I'm ready to move. Mostly just because I'm going to say a few words of introduction. First of all, just to kind of let you know, Macalester College is a small private liberal arts school in St. Paul, Minnesota. We're in the Twin Cities in St. Paul. But we have had a pretty small department for archives and special collections. And I became the special collections librarian in 2020, which was a spinoff of a set of duties that had been both belonged to our college archivist. So she had been the archivist and special collections librarian, which, as you can imagine, made her a very busy person. So there was a few other things going on in 2020, like the COVID pandemic. So it really wasn't until about almost a year later that I was able to really dive into our collection and start to do more planning of how I might teach with the collections and sort of put my own imprint on things. My undergraduate degree is in studio art, so I was really looking forward to being able to integrate more making into the work that we were doing in archives and special collections, and helping that be a way in for a lot of our students. And it also, what was going on at about the same time in 2022, we had a library director who was interested in helping librarians be able to teach credit-bearing courses on our class. And we had an administration that was very interested in expanding the idea of who could be a teacher. And not as a threat to faculty, but as a complement in with the different skill sets that people bring to the table. So at about the same time as I was developing this sort of guerrilla book arts program, um, our library director was able to get passed on our college campus 2 credit-bearing courses that were in our interdisciplinary studies department. It's not really a department, it's just a category in our catalog, but was critical library and archival practices is a 1-credit course being taught alternating springs, and then critical library and archival studies, also another topics class being taught the other alternating springs is a full 4 credit. That's our credit backbone on our campus. And so those were first approved in 2023. And so the first offering was going to be a 1-credit course in spring of 2024, which ended up being an introduction to artist books that I would teach. Next slide, please. So as a way to prep for teaching this course, I had a little bit of advance notice. So I wanted to use book arts workshops as a prototype for helping test things in order to be able to teach an effective course the next year. The other goal was with the book arts program generally is to expose our students to the works that we have in our collection as models and as examples. And so in 2023, I worked with our manager for our Digital Resources Center, her name's Brooke Schmolke, to develop a 3-workshop series that would integrate digital book making and writing and integrating digital images. And then we were going to do paste paper making to make book covers so that students could create accordion fold books. So Brooke and I did all the planning with developing templates and determining cover stock, mostly from old binding materials that we had already laying around in the library as part of our mending area. So it wasn't new material that we were having to buy. It was things that we already largely had on hand. So we had run a couple prototype paste paper making workshops, and this time we were going to do this as a 3-workshop series. We're going to ask students to try to their best, as we know it's often difficult with students to commit to coming to all 3 workshops. We had 8 people sign up, and most students persisted in some way, but 2 finally completed books. But it was really helpful to go through the workshops in order to help estimate the time that was needed for assignments, which was more than I thought, and I think would probably be more than you think. And in determining, this kind of partnerships, what sort of teamwork was going to make sense on our campus. And then, yes, ultimately there was a digital publishing component to the class that I taught. Next slide. Other workshops that we used as prototypes, or I used as prototypes, were mail art, which was a really fun and easy way in. Students loved creating postcards they could send to family and friends. Library covered the postage, and students used materials from our collection as inspiration. And we did make some copies. I don't think any of these examples here particularly reflect things from our special collections, but that was also a fun way for students to get exposure to our collections. I think it's important to remember these workshops don't have to be huge projects. They can just be making 3 postcards that they can send to family and friends. And it was nice to be able to offer them the ability to cover the postage. We have a lot of international students here, so we were also covered international postage for their postcards. The one thing I did remember, though, is students don't always remember how to address postcards, so making sure that they knew to leave a spot for that in the work that they were doing. Go ahead, next slide. So is it a book? That's where we landed with our presentation of our final materials, which is always a question people ask about artist books. The class itself, as I prototyped it and eventually offered it in spring of 2024, started with an intellectual history of artist books. And we looked at works from the Apollinaire, Duray, William Morris, and we had readings from Johanna Drucker and Marshall Weber's edited work, Freedom of the Presses, artist books of the 21st century, to help students get perspectives on this, and that this is an area worthy of study with some history and some intellectualism around it and behind it. And it was a great start, I think, for setting the stage for them to be able to do the work that they did in the class. The next slide. Then the bulk of the class, we spent doing 6 weeks of experiments with forms and techniques, each one that required the students to create some sort of experimental sample work. So one of the first ones was accordion fold books. We have a number of examples in our collection. You see one here, Bird's Bar Mitzvah. And then students created their own, as we call them, experimental versions. These were not meant to be formal finished products, but they should basically take the idea of the work of some of the examples and then implement it in a format of their choosing. And so this particular example that's shown here is from student Joel Sadowski. He's a geography student. He just graduated, and he had done a semester away traveling up and down the Mississippi River. So his work was themed throughout the semester of creating books of memory. And this is an example of his, and that he did for one of his, collecting his photos from the Mississippi River. The next slide. Students also really liked looking at zine formats. And so in this example, we have the Queer Masses series from Sarah Evanson and Jade Juneau. This was a Minnesota Book Center for the Book publication. They did a 5-zine series, and they all use different folding techniques. So then you see that modeled by Chris Shee, who applied some of digital photography work to matching to where the folds would go in his experimental project in this example. So it was a lot of fun to see how students would build off of the examples and how they would make that then their own. Next. Block printing was a lot of fun. Students really seemed to get into the block printing, and indeed we saw a fair amount, I saw a fair amount of block printing in the final projects that students did. This particular example, Kat Tara's, experimenting with words, it was, helping students remember that you either have to carve backwards or use transfer paper in some way to create their block prints. And block printing has gone on to be another workshop that we've continued after the class series. So it was good to, in some ways, prototype the block printing in the class in order to turn that into workshops later. Next slide. So I'm just going to read this quote from the student. I really appreciated how many different kinds of artist books we had the chance to look at. Learning different bookbinding and creating techniques went a long way, but then seeing how many different ways a book was made using those techniques could look like was very interesting. This is directly from the student. And I appreciated that we had pretty low stakes opportunities to try out these different techniques. We covered a lot despite only meeting once a week. So the class was 1 credit. We met once a week on Wednesday nights for an hour, which is not a lot of time. And that was one of the challenges I think that students experienced, was having to do homework, basically work on their books outside of the class period. The last weeks of the class were focused on the students creating their own final works after they had gone through 6 weeks of making these book experiments. They were asked to turn that into something that would be a artist book project they could take forward. So they had to do it in an edition of at least 2 items. But if they were making one-of-a-kinds, they could just make at least 2 one-of-a-kind items. The students had to coordinate creating and the layout of the installation, which was challenging because often they'd ask me for direction. I would turn it around and say, well, what do you want? And that was frustrating for students. So I think in terms of notes to self for the future, you know, helping students understand that there's a certain amount of uncertainty that they will need to live with. Next slide, please. So it was really delightful too to see how the artist books became inspiration for students. This particular student, Robbie, did these beautiful prints on cardboard coming right out of some of the works that were going on in Mexico and Latin America, especially in the 70s and early 80s, as you see in this example here. Next slide. There was some serious reverse engineering that happened. The student, Chris, we saw his photography earlier. He was a photography student. He really was taken by the presentation and the full page format of Ian Van Coller's book with photos from Iceland. And Chris Z took that with his photos that he had taken after some time in Tibet. Next slide. Students were not required to have such a direct line to works that inspired them, but it was beautiful to see how that came to fruition in a way that was really quite satisfying. Particularly, I love this Macala Stellar Suites by Aram Tran. Aram was a computer science major, and you know the way that Aram had drawn from this work, Gone Fishing by Asuka Osawa. I'm looking forward to using more workshops this year to prototype new making opportunities for the next time I teach this class. Possibly next spring, but we haven't yet determined the classes. I'm going to drop a link to the syllabus if anybody is interested in looking at that into the chat. And my last slide is just thank you. So and I look forward to fielding questions from you all at the end.
All right, thank you, Virginia and Ginny, for those presentations. I feel like it flows pretty well into what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to be talking about using archives and zines for a mixed media class. For a little bit of background, as I said earlier, I'm at a small liberal arts college in Northeast Tennessee. And I actually attended here. So I graduated in 2015, went and got my MLS, and then ended up back here in 2018 and have been here ever since as archivist. So I have always been interested since grad school in teaching with primary sources and have been trying to develop a program. I am a solo archivist, so it's just me, and I oversee 2 archives and everything that comes with that, as well as having librarian responsibilities. But one of the things that it had come up in the last couple of years that I wanted to do was to try to incorporate using archives into some of our art classes. Now, our art professor, Professor Kelsey Ellis, had actually been in school with me at Milligan. We tend to hire our own here. So she had gotten her master's degree and had come back here to teach art. And so that was just kind of where some of this began. Next slide, please. So the idea that I had was to somehow incorporate using archives into an art class, teaching art students how they could be inspired by things that we had in the archives. Now, our archives is mostly institutional university archives, although we do have religious archives. It's the second archives that I oversee. But it had occurred to me a couple years ago that maybe there was some way we could work this in. So I had reached out to Professor Ellis, and we met, and I kind of explained my idea that maybe we could do something where they were inspired to do collage or zines or something like that. And this was back about a year ago, last summer, late last summer. And she was very interested, and I had been looking at the courses for the fall and was trying to think what would work well. And she said, well, actually, I'm teaching a course in the spring that will be new. That's a mixed media class. That's kind of her area of specialty when it comes to art. And so she was going to be teaching that, and thought that this would actually be a really good connection to tie inspiration from archives into. So I said, well, that sounds great. That will be a really good mix. And so let's start working on that. So basically what we did is we set it up for this past spring, so spring of 2025 semester. And this was kind of the first big unit of their class. So the first kind of half of the semester is what I'll be talking about took place over. So Professor Ellis did a lecture introduction in class with her students about the history of zines. So they got to see different kinds of zines, how those were made, what the topics were, you know, what the history of this was. Then the students came over to the archives for a one-shot session with me, where we did kind of a variety of activities. So I first of all introduced them to archives, so kind of my usual introductory short lecture where I talk about what archives are, what kinds of things are in them, what we have, things like that. We then did speed dating activity. This activity is inspired by a couple different activities that I pulled from the books Past and Portal and Using Primary Sources, which are both great resources for lots of teaching with primary sources ideas. But basically what this was I took several different items from the archives and laid them out on a table, and students took turns going around and looking at them and then doing a very quick analysis, kind of a who, what, where, why, you know, what is this type of thing. They basically circulated around and looked at these different items. I had photographs, I had textual items, including a pamphlet from well, it was actually more of a booklet in some ways, of a student activity from the 1960s, and it's a tradition that continues on to this day. So it was sort of zine-like. And then one of the ones that I'm going to point out, because that is going to affect some of the examples I'm going to show in a minute, was a handbook for girls from the 1940s. The students in the class were really interested in that one and wanted to know more about it. And as far as I know, we do not have an equivalent boys handbook from the 1940s. And so that's kind of interesting to talk about. Do we think it ever existed? If it did, what do you think it would have said? If it doesn't, what does that tell you? Different things like that. And then we wrapped up the session by providing time for them to start brainstorming on what they might want their zine to be. So in this class, they were going to be developing a zine that was somehow based on, inspired by used items from the archives, obviously copies. So I had made copies of a lot of different things and then showed them how to access digitized items online so that they could get access to a variety of different things for their zines. And then Professor Ellis and I both brought a bunch of crafting supplies so that they could start putting those things together. They did not finish them in that time. They really just got started and kind of started thinking, what do I want my zine to be about? So they then used the next studio time over the next like month, I think, probably, to work on their zines. Next slide, please. So the students worked on this for, like I said, about a month with their item or items that they had picked. I didn't actually really know what they had picked, so it was all going to be a surprise to me. This was a graded activity. This was part of their class, so they did have to produce something and put work into it. It wasn't just a one shot, you can come do this and then you're done. It was, no, this is actually, you were developing something. So then I think it was right around spring break that the students finished their zines and turned them in. And they had to write up a little description of what they had done, what had inspired them, things like that. So those were then brought to the library and we put them up on display for the rest of the semester. I put up little placards with them that had what the students said about how they were inspired and what they were trying to do with that zine that they had created. And then if it was something that was a digital item I could easily link to, I put up a QR code with that. And we did put up a sign that and said people were welcome to interact with them and look at them. And it was great. We had all kinds of interesting ideas that came about. And I'm going to show you a picture of a few of those in just a moment. At the end of the semester, I asked if they would be willing to donate them to the archives for maybe future iterations of this class, also just to document this, and they were all thrilled to do that. So all of them were donated to the archive, which is great. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of some of the zines they created. This was a small class. I think there were about 8 students in the class. The number fluctuated a little bit between the final number of zines and the people who were in that early one-shot session that I did. So the picture on the far left, which is red, and it says Milligan College is crossed out because we used to be college. University is written above it. Handbook for Girls 2025 edition. So this student took that handbook from the 1940s and was inspired by that to create a 2025 edition, which was a lot of fun and had some in-jokes in it. And was just a great kind of reflection of campus culture. Another student was also inspired by this handbook, but did a different twist. So the next picture to the right that you see, which is kind of a collage of different pictures of men and boys. This was the boys' handbook. And so once again, there were some in-jokes. It was kind of snarky, but it was also a great reflection of kind of some cultural things on campus. Then the next one that I have pictured here is a biographical zine. So this one was called The Face to the Name, Getting to Know Robert Milligan, who's the namesake of our college. And this is a lot of fun because it's very different than the other two. They basically, the student took various pictures of Robert Milligan and some various other information from the archives to compile this biographical zine. And probably my favorite part about it, and I don't know how well you can see it in the picture, but it basically looks like an archival folder. So you have kind of that manila folder look on the front and the back. So I thought that was a really fun kind of nod to archival things as well. And then finally, the one here on the far right is a black cover that has Watching Silent Stories written out with letters cut out from magazines. And that one was a more poetic take. This student was inspired by a photo of students moving books into the newly opened library in the 1960s. And then just the pictures of the library in general, as I recall. And so they were just kind of ruminating on what that might be, what was going on in these pictures. So this is not all of them, but this is a great selection. I was thrilled with all of them, and it was a lot of fun to see all of the different ideas that these students had and how they were inspired by the archives to create art that reflected the place where they are going to school, but also reflected their own interests. So next slide, please. So that's all I have. This is the first time I've done this. I hope to continue doing this and other similar things in the future. Like I said, I know the professor, we're personal friends, and I think we both thought this went really well. The students seemed to really like it. And it was just a really great way to do something a little bit different with incorporating archives into inspiring young artists. So thank you very much. And I will pass it on to our next presenter.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for the awesome presentation. Hello, everybody. For those of you who missed us in the first couple of minutes, my name is Beckey. I currently serve as a special collections librarian at Carleton College, a small liberal arts college in Northfield, Minnesota. And this past year, I've had the pleasure of getting to know Katharine Hargrave, who also works with me at Carleton College and who's joined me for this presentation today. So I'll let her introduce herself here.
Hi, so yes, I'm an assistant professor of French in the Department of French and Francophone Studies with my colleague Beckey, and I've had a lot of fun collaborating. So I'll let Jackie kick us off with kind of about Carleton and special collections and how we came up with this idea.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of fun this past year, as Katharine mentioned, and we've really dived into doing some experiential learning and learning through making, and this has really elevated our special collections sessions beyond the traditional show and tell format. And for me personally, I feel like it's really contributing to making special collections at Carleton a more inclusive, student-centered learning environment. So today we're going to be talking about these class visits, how we collaborated together, which I think for those of you who haven't worked with a faculty member on this sort of project might be interested to hear on how we collaborated. We're going to talk about what the class visits entailed and then our takeaways, and then hopefully we'll have some time in the Q&A to talk more about thoughts, comments, questions, and ideas. So next slide, please. So Carleton College, in a nutshell, is a small liberal arts college located in Northfield, Minnesota, with a little over 2,000 students. Our special collections is pretty extensive for a college of this size. We have just over 17,000 items, and each year we host around 70 class visits from a wide range of academic disciplines. And these sessions typically serve between 10 and 25 students. And as the sole special collections librarian, I'm essentially leading our instruction program, and I get to oversee collection development, which is really exciting. But it's essentially a one-woman show. So I'm a pretty busy person here at Carleton, but I'm fortunate to be part of a broader department that includes the college archive. So we partner with them quite a bit. We don't have a fancy book arts lab, but we do have a lot of enthusiasm and a DIY ethos, and also amazing partners in the makerspace. So we've been experimenting with a lot of hands-on experiential learning that highlights underrepresented voices in book history. And we're going to chat a bit about that here today. So next slide, please.
So I'm going to quickly talk about why I'm here and how I started collaborating with Jackie. So she and I met for the first time at new faculty orientation last September, so September of 2024. And I think that kind of surreptitiously, we both started our careers at Carleton at the same time. And so when I met her, I was telling her about how I wanted to work with special collections, and part of that inspiration, just to talk briefly about my background, is because part of my education in France included attending the Book History Institute in Lyon, France. And I work a lot with primary source material and book history in my research on 17th and 18th century French lyric tragedies. So I knew I wanted my students to do something with that. So Jackie and I agreed to me after the first trimester, because we're on a trimester system at Carleton, to discuss what we could do together in my classes in the winter and spring terms. So we met, I'd say probably end of November at a little coffee shop in downtown Northfield called Little Joy. And that's where she really kind of started to ask me about my classes, what my learning goals were, and then what I was hoping to get out of my visits with special collections. That discussion was really important because in my mind, I was working with what special collections already had, and that conversation sparked discussing the fact that they had a budget that they could also purchase materials if there was anything I was explicitly interested in my classes that I wanted students to experience. So I'll let Jackie talk about in the next slide kind of their first experience working together on the French Revolution. At that point in time, we didn't have a whole lot of new materials yet. So I'll let her talk about what we did.
Yeah, so we dove in and collaborated for this French Revolution class, Then and Now, which sort of explored how ideas were disseminated in 18th century France. And Diderot's Encyclopédie was a text we were using quite a bit during the special collections unit of the class. So we decided, hey, let's do a printmaking workshop. That would be super fun. So the first visit entailed students being introduced to special collections and learning foundational skills for approaching the book as an artifact. So this session included a brief presentation on the cultural context surrounding the creation of these materials, followed by a close-looking exercise using a guided worksheet. And our goal with the first session was to help students understand how the physical form of the book contributes to the text's meaning, which really teed us up for this experiential learning printmaking workshop. So the follow-up session entailed printmaking, and we used laser cut wood blocks created in collaboration with the campus makerspace. And students had the opportunity to try intaglio printing and take home a print of their own, which was really exciting. This workshop offered a tactile way to engage with the social significance of the text we were studying, primarily the Encyclopédie, which, as you can see here in the engraving at the top, has a lot of images of the labor and the print shops and the people involved in making these texts, which was perfect for talking about recovering the labor behind these books. So we were really focusing on that. And we were really fortunate, speaking of collaboration, to also have an exceptional student employee at the makerspace this past year, Ellie, who really played a pivotal role in this. She had a background in printmaking, and she also had built a DIY set of provisional presses, which you can see in the image there, those green presses. So it was magic, all three of us coming together. And I was able to take images of the engravings we were examining in class, and she was able to laser cut wood blocks from these. And we were able to have students actually print from these blocks. So you may be wondering to yourself, how the heck did you have ink around collection materials? And the answer is we didn't. We popped up outside of the reading room, which was a new sort of experiment too, and we spilled out into the library outside of the reading room. And it entailed setting up a table, as you can see here, with the presses. Students had the chance to use those speedball brayers you see there in the GIF below as well, where they inked up the blocks that Ellie from the makerspace had made, and then they were able to put their plates into the press and experience printing. Some tips if you want to recreate this: water-based ink is great for cleanup, which I learned pretty quickly. It's awesome to save this for the end of the session so students don't bring ink back into the classroom on their hands or their clothing. And students teaching students is a huge win. It was really awesome to see Ellie from the makerspace be sort of a teaching figure in the classroom for this workshop. So that was really phenomenal to have her in the mix. And we're so excited about this printing workshop that we bought a press after this. So I put an image here in case anyone is curious about buying a press as well. It's called the Book Beetle. It's a small little tabletop press. So we're going to be popping up on campus hopefully after this. So next slide.
So as I mentioned before, when we met in November, we had kind of talked about what are some of the dream materials that I had wanted to see and incorporate into my classes. And I knew that I wanted to work with pre-revolutionary pamphlets. So over the course of several weeks, probably even months, Jackie would send me little emails saying, hey, I found this in the catalog. Is this something that you might be interested in and you could use with your students or not? So by the time I was teaching this class in the final trimester, spring of 2025, on the art of scandal, we had received all of the pamphlets that we were hoping to work with. So the art of scandal, very briefly, the kind of overarching question for the class is, what is a scandal? Is it a product of the time and place where it occurs, or is it something that transcends national and temporal boundaries? So we were studying scandals from the 17th century up to and including the present day. And to answer that question, as it relates to items before the French Revolution and how scandals were perpetuated, we talked about pamphlets as a genre and how they were commonly used to disseminate ideas that were critical of the monarchy during a time of very strict censorship. So we really scaffolded visits with special collections so that we were doing things in the classroom and in special collections. We weren't just suddenly in special collections randomly. So they had some pre-session activities to complete before coming. And then our first session, as you can see in the photo on the top in the middle there, was really about recognizing the material qualities of a pamphlet versus, say, the text that Jackie referenced in the previous slide, like a volume of Diderot's encyclopedia. What are some of the differences between those kinds of documents? So students were really practicing slow looking. And after that session and a discussion about what comprises a pamphlet, students used Sarah Werner's activity of creating a pamphlet to design their own pamphlets in French, including little details like making them anonymous, trying to give false information about where it was written, things like that. And then I printed those pamphlets out for them, and then they brought them to their second session in special collections. And that's the image on the right there for you. They practiced folding the pieces of paper to create their own little in-quarto, and then I distributed the pamphlets to students anonymously, so they had no idea whose pamphlet they were getting. And then we happen to have quills and ink in special collections. So while I was distributing pamphlets to students, Jackie was kind of setting up a room where she, as you can see, we're putting protective paper down and things like that. So when students came back in, they could practice like writing little marginalia, trying to find out who the person was who wrote their pamphlet and denouncing them using the quills. And then based off of this and what we had in special collections, each student worked with another person on their own pamphlet that special collections had acquired. And they translated the first few pages of that pamphlet. And of course, this is happening outside of special collections. So that anybody on campus can use these primary source materials, regardless of whether or not they can read 18th century French. So that's kind of an ongoing project that we're working on about putting those translations up on the website so that anybody can use those. So it was all about experiential learning, kind of public scholarship, having their work actually published, and then an ongoing project that we hope to continue in years to come. Next slide, please.
So some of the takeaways really briefly before we wrap up, and I know we're getting close to time here. One of the major takeaways from this collaboration was the importance of clearly defined learning goals. From the very beginning, Katharine and I really spoke about that a lot. And that question really shaped all of our planning and conversations. Teaching with rare materials can really easily slip into a kind of instructional tourism, like the show and tell that fetishizes the past rather than critically engaging with it. So we really wanted to make this workshop elevate that and bring some pedagogical value. So what we ultimately landed on is you can't teach book history without teaching process. So the book doesn't just fall out of the sky. If students are interested in recovering the decisions made by the human makers behind the text, and if they're able to begin to understand how the book is made as a socially and culturally embedded object, that really brings a lot of additional important social context to their reading of the book and allows them to ask deeper questions. So what social codes are embedded in this object? How does material form affect its cost, its audience, or its cultural status? So this sort of making really is a vital path to understanding the book's broader significance.
I would also add as well, just obviously, as other presenters have mentioned, planning ahead, especially if you're acquiring materials, that takes time. So, I mean, it took us several months sometimes to acquire materials, especially if they were coming from Europe. And then kind of on the last point, in terms of scaffolding visits, just really making sure that we were integrating things in the classroom and in special collections so that it wasn't just, hey, all of a sudden you're in special collections and then we're doing something else in the classroom. And I think I would just end with this quote here. I think this was a very fulfilling activity for students. I gave them an anonymous form to fill out at the end of the term to get their feedback. And somebody wrote, and I quote, "I love the creative activities like writing and translating pamphlets. And it was wonderful to be able to use special collections." So I just think that speaks to how fruitful these kind of experiences can be for our students. And with that, thank you all so much. And our emails are on the next slide if you would like to send us any emails for questions.
That's wonderful. Thank you all so much. This was really fabulous. I got a lot of notes I'm going to follow up on and found a lot of kind of solidarity and commonalities with folks. So for our presenters, if anyone is able to stick around for a few minutes, I can stick around for like the next 5 if folks want to ask questions, but we'll also share our email addresses in the minutes that are being taken for our session right now. So you're welcome to unmute or put questions in the chat.
Just for the notes so that I don't copy over someone's email who doesn't want to be copied, I will pop the note link in if you can add your own email to that if you are willing to share it.